So I have a relationship with each of the panelists that predates this particular session. And I'd say I go furthest back with our first speaker, Henry McKoy. And I think, Henry, when we first met, you were in banking and was looking at innovative ways to invest in HBCU infrastructure, green initiatives, that he was clear about the potential payback, benefits and rewards. And he's also been and still associated with an HBCU, North Carolina Central, but he has been tapped by the administration to provide leadership in the Department of Energy. And I thought there's no better person to set the table for the conversation today than Dr. Henry McKoy. Turn this thing, wait a minute, let me turn this thing off. I'm overdo it.
Okay. Thank you, Felicia. I've never known a situation where Felicia actually needed a microphone. Her voice carries, but we do go way back and appreciate this opportunity. And I remember it was probably more than a decade or so ago, we were together with UNCF whenever a Kresge grant to try to work with minority serving institutions to get them their buildings efficient. Michael Regan, who's now the EP administrator, was with us. We were all kind of here in Atlanta, kind of looking at that. So it's so wonderful to be here with you all. Appreciate the invitation. We're going back and forth, and I'm glad I was able to make it. Thanks to Julian and Kendra and the conversations. I have my chief of staff, Chris Castro, here, who is always kind of moving things forward. But I want to kind of kick off this, as Felicia said, and just kind of set the tone for this wonderful panel here. As you mentioned, long history with HBCUs. I most recently was the head of the entrepreneurship program at North Carolina Central University School of Business. And really, for me, all these things come together, this notion of decarbonization and this idea of how do we move the community forward, and making sure that everybody benefits from these resources. So I want to give you kind of a quick just intro to hopefully set the stage for what we're doing in the U.S. Department of Energy and how I ended up in this particular role. I lead something called the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, or SCEP for short. SCEP is one of the brand new offices within DOE. It's $16 billion of funding that really kicked off originally with the bipartisan infrastructure law from November 2021. I always tell folks I'm right at my year's anniversary in this role. Chris actually just had his year yesterday, I think it was.
Yes, sir.
Yesterday, 1 year anniversary in this role. And when we took over this office in July of 2022, we had $6 billion. About 3 weeks later, the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and we had $16 billion. And so it just kind of shows you kind of how quickly things can change. But just quickly, our whole purpose is to be this office that serves as a bridge from the Department of Energy, which has historically been almost primarily research and development and kind of executing on technologies, to something that's really connected to communities, and particularly communities that historically have not been necessarily around the table at DOE. Tribal communities, minority communities, all things of that nature. So that's really our purpose. We wake up every day with this mission of making sure that everybody's around the table, everyone's helping to set the table, set the menu, and most of all, that everybody's eating. So just to give you some sense, some of you may have heard, if you follow the administration, a day or so after President Biden took over office, he instituted an executive order called Justice 40. And the idea of Justice 40 is that all these benefits, the trillions of dollars, if you think about my office, Office of State and Community Energy Programs has $16 billion to invest. But across DOE at large, we have about $100 billion to invest in all kinds of different programs, everything from manufacturing to demonstrations in communities to tech transfer and things of that nature. And then across the federal government as a whole, but related to clean energy, is over $500 billion. And that's in everything from housing to transportation. We have a litany of partners around the table that we're working with. And so there's all kind of places for organizations and people to show up and get access to these resources. And so this Justice 40 and climate justice is a centerpiece of the work that we do at DOE, that we're focused on doing at DOE. And that I want to point out that word economic is a key part of this, right? Because it's one thing to be told, hey, we're gonna make sure there's justice in this. It's a whole other thing to make sure that justice comes with resources and investment. And so 40% of the overall benefits, what that means is we look across all the federal programs within the U.S. government, 40% of those benefits should accrue to historically disadvantaged communities, minority communities, or others that's off the beaten path, often left behind. So if you don't know a lot about Justice 40, I would hope that you spend some time looking at it. When you look at kind of disadvantaged communities and historically black colleges and universities, you see an incredible overlap, right? If you look at the bottom, that Bible Belt, the Southeast, you see so many of the communities that are considered or designated as historically disadvantaged, along with the 2-year and 4-year HBCUs, the black dots are the 4 years, the red dots are the 2 years. And so that the frame around that is to understand just how critically important HBCUs are to trying to move this work forward. We have to have partners at the table that make this happen. And so as we think about these communities in the Southeast, which is a prime region as we think about it, we think about the power of HBCUs to be a part of this, these solutions and be a part of kind of instituting this work going forward. So I'm so happy to be with UNCF in this conversation. Just to give you some sense of, we often, for decades, we've heard this notion of, STEM and diversity of STEM and things of that nature. We really take that work seriously as we think about the technical side of what DOE is and the work that we do and the investment that we make. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars a year from everywhere from DOE and our Office of Sciences and other programs, energy efficiency and renewable energy, into STEM programs to try to drive that pipeline of who's working on this project. It does matter, just to give you some context, as Chris and I set up the Office of State Community programs, we focus on 3, I say, overarching kind of drivers of our plan. One is to diversify the staff and team that we build so that they're reflective of America. That's everything from the interns to the fellows, which are early career individuals, to staff, to leadership, to make sure that we are heavily diverse in that area. The second thing is around procurement. Kind of, we have a $16 billion pool of funds. Some portion of that funds is used to hire organizations and invest in projects, things of that nature. So we want to make sure that we're doing that in a much more diverse way. And then finally, it's focused on this notion of meeting communities where they are, making sure that we go into communities and work with them to help them move forward. And so going forth, STEM is such a huge area of kind of the talent pipeline that we have. And so we know the value that, because HBCUs develop the most diverse STEM candidates around, and so we know that that's a key part of how we're going to move forward by working with HBCUs around this work. There's 2 prizes that we have that I think are important. May DOE announced a $7.75 million investment in HBCUs to support the STEM workforce, as I just said. And that's just kind of the beginning as we think about this. It's open to all 100 HBCUs, and so we hope, as a function of not only this conversation, but keeping an eye on what we're doing, that folks will, really think about where do you fit in this, and how do we make sure resources get into your schools in order to support the students. So we have an Inspire track and a partnership track, and these slides can be made available, but I want to make sure that you understand that we have funds. We just released $150 million in funds 2 days ago around workforce to create that pipeline. So there's all kind of resources that are available to HBCUs as a part of this work. We're also Energy Future Grants. I think it's going today, right? We're launching tomorrow. Okay, and this it's $47 million total over the course of a couple of years. We're releasing $27 million. It's a competitive funding opportunity announcement, so to hit the streets, and it offers up the opportunity for, say, a HBCU to work with a local government. So, for example, any of the number of HBCUs in Atlanta could partner with the city of Atlanta around this work, or other cities where HBCUs are, and think about how do you move those communities forward, particularly as a part of the work that we do. Every single grantee that comes to us has to have a community benefits plan that essentially says, how are you going to help make sure that these resources like Justice 40, that these benefits accrue to individuals, whether it be jobs, whether it be workforce opportunities, whether it be procurement opportunities, the environment and things of that nature. So I say all that to say that you make incredibly important partners for these organizations in order to even be able to get the grants. These Justice 40 and the other elements, they're things that we track, and they account for up to 20% of the application process. And so a city or somebody that comes to us with a grant proposal, but that doesn't have people from the community-based organizations and organizations like HBCUs at the table in leadership roles, don't stand a whole lot of chance of getting access to grants from us. And so that's how we're baking this work into this. And again, the Energy Futures Grant, which is one of our newer programs, will $27 million will hit the street in the next day. Ensuring resiliency and reliability of our grid. Recognize that many of the communities that we showed that are historically disadvantaged, they're the ones that suffer the brunt of when power outages go out, or when something happens. They're a lot of times the first power to go out and the last one to get restored. And so a key part of the work that we're looking at is through, I have a colleague, Maria Robertson, who runs our grid deployment office. We have every piece that you can think of this kind of resilient energy grid that's available. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about these communities around the country that are most vulnerable. How do we make sure investments are going in those? And I also want to add to that, not only are we talking about the grid, but we're also talking about, we have a manufacturing office. And so we have these Buy American provisions within these legislation. And what that means is that the administration is trying to make sure that we're buying American goods and things of that nature. So I want to encourage communities and organizations to get involved in the advanced manufacturing and things of that nature, so that we can think about how do you create wealth in the community, how do you leave something behind, how do you have ownership and things of that nature. And so that's a key part of this. And kind of as I start to wind down, bipartisan infrastructure law, Inflation Reduction Acts are two historic legislations, and we as in DOE, and particularly in my Office of State and Community Program, we manage a lot of those funding. So this is a particular one around workforce. If you do the math on this, there's $260 million in workforce resources that we're going to make available to communities around this workforce development piece, and making sure that folks have high-paying, family-sustaining jobs that help them move up the economic ladder and make sure that they're able to live the American dream. These different aspects are rolling out, and some of these provisions go almost 10 years out to 2031. So I want you all to keep your eye on, I provide information at the end, on these announcements, because again, HBCUs, of course, as a part of the educational pipeline, is a key part of this workforce piece. And not only can we not do the work without having the right workforce to do energy audits and to do installation and things of that nature, but we also know that that's a key part of making this work sustainable over time by creating income and creating opportunity and creating upward mobility. And so we want to hopefully keep your eyes on this, because we're looking for minority women and men. But I always like to add this aspect, this part of my banking background and my entrepreneurial background, that it's not just about the workforce part. In my mind, is not just about getting the job right. It's also about who owns the business and who's making the decision, who's signing the checks. And so a key part of this is making sure that out of this comes that opportunity for entrepreneurship, for business ownership, that helps to grow the community. And so hopefully you all can plug into that. So kind of finally, we have another $550 million that we, as part of our Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Funds. That money is going out to 2,708 grantees. That includes all 50 states, 5 territories, DC, 1,878 local governments around the United States, all 745 tribal nations. So I mention that because these grants go into community, and they're going to be looking for opportunities for procurement. They're going to need community-based partners to help to deploy those capital and things of that nature. And so certainly Atlanta's getting the ECBG. Many communities around the country where HBCUs are getting access to ECBGs, the Durhams, the Raleighs, the Trumps. And so a key part of this is to kind of follow the money, as they say. There's a lot of money going a lot of different places, and hopefully you all can keep track of that. Again, this is a wonderful opportunity. Kind of finally, as we think about what we're looking to support for all communities, as I said, if I was going to put it into a nutshell, is looking around these good jobs. It's an economic opportunity. DIAA is one of the key areas that we focus on within our Office of SCIP and DOE writ large. We see ourselves as activating the goals of the administration. with my leadership and with Chris and others in leadership, we're able to really actualize goals that are set kind of on high to say, well, we're as an office with resources, we're going to push those things forward. Justice 40, as I mentioned, I always say with the 40% of the benefits, I always say to my team, that's a floor, not a ceiling, right? You know, is how do we make those bigger and broader investments to make sure everybody's a part of this? And then again, the workforce and community agreements. Having somebody coming from banking, I know that you know, a agreement, a community reinvestment agreement, those things a lot of times are just a piece of paper, right? Our goal is to look at how do we enforce those things. So we have aspects within our work and how we disperse grants to make sure that folks follow up on those particular commitments. And so kind of finally, if you take up that site, skep@hq.doe.gov, what you have is a way to connect us. If you send an email to that email address or you know hit that QR code, you'll be able to get access to ongoing information from us, a newsletter that includes a director's report from me, as well as ongoing information about how we're going to support and invest in the community, broadly speaking. But I wrap it up like this. There's no way we do this work without HBCUs at the centerpiece of this. Research, development, workforce, all those things are part of what we have to build in order to make sure that everybody benefits from this incredible opportunity in the economy. Like I said, that $500 billion is in the administration. I want to make sure that it's getting into communities, getting into institutions that anchor the community in ways that sprout and grow. And so I'm so looking forward to this conversation and hearing all these great speakers. So thank you all so much.
I think I'll just use this because I'm not that good at going back and forth, but I did love channeling my inner Oprah. So, but thank you. Thank Dr. McKoy.
Yeah.
So, and as I was promoting this session, I said there would be at least 2 people that everyone needs to meet, and I forgot to include myself, so there's at least 3. But our next person, I'm working with HBCUs in particular, the need for a framework to move forward in terms of all things green, but how HBCUs can address climate change. When we started on this journey, and we being UNCF, we were partnered with Second Nature. And at that time, Second Nature had a president's climate commitment and also had some support in campuses driving climate action plans. And I don't know, I got grayer, and somehow Second Nature has gotten more youthful. But Blythe Coleman-Mumford is the southern regional person for Second Nature. But more importantly, she has a passion for HBCUs. And so I asked Blythe if she would share with us where Second Nature is and how she sees HBCUs moving forward. And I'm just going to slide the mic over to her. So Blythe.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here and also to see climate action prioritized amongst all the amazing conversations here is really important. So Second Nature has been one of the longest standing organizations to advance climate action in and through higher education. That's always been the premise of the work we do. We started with 12 founding signatories, unfortunately none of them HBCUs, but we have had a lot of HBCUs that submitted climate action plans from 2006, 2008. Some include Spelman, the AUC Center, I think we had Morgan State at the time, and various HBCUs, I think 22 at our max engagement, and now we're down to about 12 through like early 2000s to now, which indicates that climate action is a priority for HBCUs, but I think it's about the capacity and all the constraints we've been talking about in terms of budgeting, having a designated office for sustainability, which is not something that most HBCUs have. If they do, that's really great, but we need to champion that more. So I think that's something I'm really trying to create a platform to speak on at Second Nature, because historically we've had a lot of R1 institutions like Duke University, University of Michigan, that can do all these really big scale projects like solar, geothermal retrofits. Those take a lot of capital up front to invest in, and you don't always see the savings until much later. So I think it's really hard to do these kind of really great curb appeal projects that might attract students that want to see this, but it's, again, you have to wait for the savings. So I think we're trying to promote low-hanging fruit projects, energy efficiency, tax savings, all the things you spoke about, which are really important to know of. Even doing deferred maintenance or knowing which buildings are of priority to at least use energy in. And there's, since COVID, I think a lot of buildings that have gone offline because there are less students on campus, and I think now there are more students coming back to campus. So in thinking about emissions transportation, or the emissions through transportation, is a really important emission scope to track. So Second Nature provides a platform to track scopes 1 through 3, which are the different emissions types that really generate electricity on campus, do whatever offsets the campus might be invested in. And that's also a conversation out in HBCUs and carbon offsets. So I think even just like talking about various ways you can do carbon reduction goals in innovative ways is something I want to see more HBCUs at the table to discuss what they are doing. So just separate to that. But so essentially Second Nature has 3 different commitment types. One's our carbon commitment, which is just focusing on carbon reduction goals by a certain date, which they can define either by what the state's doing, what the local municipality's doing. We have a resiliency commitment, which is advancing campus community relationships. We have a framework to do that. We have community resilience building workshops and things like that that ask for feedback from the community. What do you want to see in your institution? How can your institution remain resilient in the face of the very timely issue of climate change, which is proportionally affecting institutions in the Southeast. The Southeast, that's a front line for urban heat island effect, all these natural disasters that we're seeing in the news. So HBCUs are the front lines of that. So they should be part of this conversation to speak about what they are doing, what they're able to do, because it's a conversation that is timely and it's happening right now. And finally, we have a climate commitment, which is institutions can document carbon reduction goals and resiliency planning if they have the capacity to do yearly inventory, which is again an issue for HBCUs having staff that can do yearly carbon inventory. And that's just an issue to identify someone that can do that work for a period of time. So Second Nature wants to provide a framework to be accountable to the goals that institution sets for itself. And hopefully 2023 or 2030, I think, is the closest goal I've seen. 2050 is a goal institutions also set, which is the date they're trying to get carbon neutral by. And that's really the goal for, and there's various ways, again, to do that. Behavioral changes on campus, doing carbon offsets, investing in energy efficiency programming. Those are all, I think, low-hanging fruit for HBCUs, but I also really want to see more HBCUs be able to invest in larger projects like solar, geothermal, other things, but that, again, takes more budget up front. So I think all the conversations about foundation support should really be investing in these longer-term projects. And so my role is really trying to get a sense of what HBCUs are doing now, what direct one-on-one assistance they need, how to match them with other institutions doing similar work at scale that actually is feasible and not something that seems lofty and also really expensive. So those are all things that I'm trying to champion. We have a working group with HBCUs, MSIs, sharing best practices. We have a buddy program recently piloted between Bennett College and Agnes Scott, both women's colleges in the Southeast, with similar demographics. I mean, Bennett being the HBCU, Agnes Scott also having a large Black population, both situated in the Southeast. So they can really say a lot with each other about how they can meet this moment with resiliency planning, integrate things like green revolving funds, which is a savings for energy efficiency projects being looped into its own self-sufficient fund or self-operating fund eventually once the savings are able to be pooled in that certain area. So things like that are things that Agnes Scott's doing, that I would love to see other HBCUs doing, that are a similar scale to a liberal arts college like Agnes Scott. So I know we're at time, so I'll pause there, but those are some things we do. Happy to take other questions later.
Thank you, thank you. And as Blythe talked about HBCUs and what they can reach for, I want to mention that from day one, HBCUs have had an aspiration to do more and better, but often lack the investment. And without that upfront investment, it still is difficult to do deeper retrofits and larger projects. But, say square one is the energy audit. Without an energy audit, we don't know what's going on. And energy audits are typically very expensive. And so, and we're also needing to ensure that our students who are wonderful, brilliant, and we do a really great job, but they also need to have some real hard skills that for employability, and we know that they're on the front line of what is a global energy transition and transformation. So, Gemini Energy Solutions. So we have a young man that's a North Carolina A&T graduate, and some of the folks up here just love North Carolina A&T, so we say yay. And then he also went to this little school out west, Stanford, where he got a PhD. Apparently he couldn't do that at North Carolina A&T, so he had to go where they would take him. But Anthony Kinslow, who is 33 years old, founder and CEO of Gemini Energy Solutions. And I'm stealing, he's gonna have to say other things, because when he approached, we have a DOE-funded HBCU fellowship program. And Anthony approached and said, hey, we can train students to be energy audit data collectors that can perform investment grade, and the banker knows a lot about that, investment grade energy audits. So that's the audit you need to get the money to do the retrofit. And so we have spent the last 2 years training AUC, Atlanta University Center students to be these data collectors. And Anthony Kinslow, North Carolina A&T HBCU graduate, a little Stanford PhD, well, we'll accept it. But he can share more about his program, his business, and where they are now. So Anthony.
Thanks, Felicia. You also forgot to mention that I'm also a lecturer at Stanford University right now.
All right.
So I started Gemini Energy Solutions because I saw two major issues. The first being that, as Felicia mentioned, energy audits, which is the starting point for any upgrades that you want to do, were not being done in our community. And they weren't, and the people who were trained to do energy audits did not look like us. And so I wanted to set out to solve both of these problems with one solution. And so what we developed was a software that automated the analysis and the report writing for an energy audit, so that all you needed to do was train people to collect the right data. And the idea behind this is that technology can be used not to take away jobs, but to increase the number of people who can do what has been historically complex and highly technical jobs, and thus accelerating our transition in our ability to retrofit buildings, in particular in our communities, in rural areas and historically disadvantaged communities that do not have the resources, do not have the technical expertise. And so when me and Felicia actually met on a conference call where she was complaining about the high cost of energy audits, and I was able to come on right after and say, hey, we have a solution for that. And energy audits, start off around $5,000 per building. Floor, not ceiling. We offering $500 floor. So to give you an idea of what that means, and so what we've been working on with HBCU Green Fund is really trying to understand not just training the students to do energy audits, but also having them be able to train their contemporaries, right? So one of the things that we really found exciting was that when the students started to train their friends, that's when they really clicked with it. That's when they really started to be able to do this and scale this. And so we're really excited about the potential of students training other students across the HBCU campus. And I'll also add that we're working with other organizations to address some of the issues that Blythe talked about regarding the heavy investment to do major retrofits of HBCU properties. Because we all know HBCUs is a community anchor, right? We need them to be resilient. We need them to be leading the way in climate, in clean tech. And so one of our partners, Optimal Tech, is actually working on bringing forth the money to do major retrofits for universities. And part of that is training the students to help with the audits of that, and setting up a business within the HBCU campus for recent alum and their students, so that they are doing the deferred maintenance. They are doing the maintenance. You're starting a company within the HBCU, which they will be trained to do the maintenance on the campus, and then be able to work with the community surrounding them to start retrofitting those buildings as well. So we see HBCUs as the starting point. I think everybody here agrees with that. We are in an inflection point in our future where if we don't start making some dramatic changes quickly, it's going to be too late. We're going to miss out, not only in the climate disaster that we're looming in front of us, but also in terms of the revenue generating opportunities for our communities.
Yep.
And HBCUs have a great opportunity of being the lead on that, and realizing that transitioning to clean energy can also start to address some of their other money issues that they're having. We all know that they deserve a lot more money than they've gotten. And we can also start building structures inside the HBCUs that are generating revenue for themselves, generating revenue for the community, and I'll pause there.
You mentioned the Georgia project.
Oh yes, sorry. We're also work with churches, and we're getting ready, in a few months we're starting to do 100 Black churches throughout Georgia. And each of these churches will be a microgrid with resiliency, EV charging stations, solar, and electrification. So we're decarbonizing these churches, upgrading their buildings, and making sure that they can be examples for their community, generating revenue to then put back into their community as well.
Thank you. So that's what we're doing with students. But of course, most students don't come to campus wanting to become an energy data collector. They come, they have other desires, but a growing area is environmental sciences and policy. And Florida A&M University is a leader in that regard. They actually have a PhD program. So you can start as an undergraduate and go all the way through to a PhD. And so we have Dr. Richard Gragg from FAMU, who can speak about the connection between students, community, program development, curriculum development, and with that, I'm here.
Florida representative. Thank you, Felicia. And I'm really honored to be on this panel, and I am thankful to the UNCF for deciding that this was a priority topic for the conference. As far as Florida A&M University, yes, we do offer the environmental science degree, also environmental studies. But where I want to start is what I call around our topic in terms of climate and environmental justice, climate action and environmental justice. And what that says to me is focus and emphasis on the communities that are impacted by these issues. And I think the most effective way to accomplish what we're talking about is that we have to move around in this area or theme or framework that we call participatory governance. And that's where we engage the primarily impacted populations in the decision-making process and engage, and instead of us coming to say what we're going to do, we find out what they want to do, and then we say what we can do together and come up how we can collaboratively address these problems. So I think that's a very important perspective that we want to operate on. I think as well, when we talk about energy or STEM, I think we have a big issue where we have a lot of underrepresentation in STEM. And I think the way to sell that or market that to potential students is to let them know that STEM is going to provide a lot of solutions to problems in communities where they come from. And I think that's how we can engage more students in STEM. I think also we have to invite students outside of quote-unquote STEM disciplines into STEM. We need journalists to write about the issues. We need artists to convey the issues. We need psychologists to talk about the behavioral changes that are needed across the globe in how we relate to each other in the environment. So I think that's another way to advance STEM, is to invite our peers and others into it. I think also when we talk about HBCUs and community engagement, I think we also have to be willing to talk about more than just getting people degrees, formal degrees. And I think we have to look at what's going on in the community and these kind of opportunities that Dr. Kinslow and others were mentioning. I think that has to get in the community in terms of workforce development, where those are the people who are going to take these jobs, right? So I think we want to advance that. And one of the things that I'm involved in as the president of the National Technical Association, we are in a partnership with Next Era Energy, and we are funded to launch an HBCU Energy Institute. And our principal role is to convene HBCUs and Black organizations around energy and energy issues. So I'm looking forward to working with the Department of Energy and their support in this effort and initiative.
Thank you. So, NTA, National Technical Institute, Next Era, and the new HBCU Energy Institute. So, one of the most important areas, opportunities, and I learned this again from Dr. McKoy, is how HBCUs and UNCF, what we do around our investment. So while we are sometimes defined as under-resourced, we do indeed have resources. We do indeed have endowments. How we leverage, invest, and monitor those endowments and what we do collectively to move us and ensure that the collective HBCU ecosystem is able to move forward and take full advantage of this opportunity, this moment. It has a lot to do with how we think about endowments. And more than one person will address that, I'm sure, when we get to discussion. But we have Roberta Lobo, I got it right that time, yay, who is with TIAA Craft, but my connection to her is through the Intentional Endowment Network. And so Roberta is going to share with you, I think, a bit of TIAA and a bit of IEN, and really speak to endowments and the power that we might have that's underutilized.
Awesome, thank you for that lovely intro, Felicia. And also just thank you to everyone who's here attending the conference. You know, as a child of immigrants with a lot of family who's currently residing in the global south, I really do quite literally have a lot of skin in the game when it comes to the climate crisis, as I'm sure some of the folks in this room also feel the same. So, you know, I'm here representing Nuveen Asset Management. Nuveen is a global diversified asset manager. We have 1.2 trillion in assets under management. That was a trillion with a T, which still blows my mind every time. And we are also the asset management arm of TIAA. For anyone not familiar, TIAA is a retirement services and record-keeping provider, primarily serving colleges, universities, healthcare, and other nonprofit institutions, which obviously includes HBCUs. And so when we're talking about endowments and we're talking about climate action, I think there's 3 things that I'd really like you to take away from what I'm going to say. When we're thinking about climate action, we want to talk about climate resilience and climate solutions. So when we're talking to other people about that, we want to think long-term performance, risk mitigation, and mission alignment. So in terms of long-term performance, I think hopefully I can dispel the rumor that investing in things like green solutions and green tech means that you're giving up some sort of financial performance or giving up a financial return. In fact, as a firm, we think that the market is simply not pricing in correctly people who are providing climate solutions and climate resilience. Someone like a Gemini Energy Solutions, we think the market isn't valuing these companies as high as they should, because in the long run, we're either going to quite literally run out of fossil fuels, or governments, agencies, people are going to demand a transition away from carbon. And the people that will be leading that transition are green energy providers, green energy solutions. So definitely endowments investing in green tech, energy solutions, especially in the long term, they're going to outperform. So on to risk mitigation. Just especially for an HBCU, something that is a real business risk to your organizations is systemic inequality. Obviously, you want as many students to be able to attend your universities or your colleges as possible. But if they're not able to have access to loans, have access to financial services, and even beyond that, access to jobs that pay, that represents a systemic risk to your business. So using an endowment to achieve what we can call S for social goals is a way to mitigate that risk to your business. So that could include investing in companies that provide not-for-profit student loans. It could look like any other investments in the community that would eventually help your college or university at the end. And then so finally getting on to mission alignment. You know, anecdotally, we've seen quite a lot of organizations taking a look at either their investment policy or just the way that they structure their retirement plans to be more in line with who they as an organization and their mission as an organization. So for an example, we had a children's hospital that said, we don't want civilian firearms in any of our investment programs. We said, that absolutely makes sense. That's one of the greatest threats, quite literally, to children in the country. It's a reputational risk to have your investments in civilian firearms. It doesn't align with your company's mission and their values. And so, you know, the kind of call to action here, I would encourage you to take a look at your organization's investment policies, your endowment investment policy, your retirement plan, and see if there are places where you can try to make some more of that mission-aligned, values-aligned proposition. And with that, you know, we'd encourage you to reach out to your record keeper, especially if that record keeper is TIAA. We're happy to sort of walk you through how we talk to our investment committee to try to get these sort of impact or green or social investments improved. You know, when you come to the table talking about long-term performance and risk mitigation, sometimes it might turn the non-believers into people that will say, hey, actually this is the future for how we should be investing. So I'll pause right there.
Thank you. Very important area. And so we have one last presenter before we're open for Q&A. And this young man, at least he was a young man when I first met him. I stayed young, he keeps going forward. But Daniel Blackman was most recently our Region 4 administrator. But I know Daniel when he was a young, I guess, I don't know if he was even still a student, but I was working with Dr. Lowry. We were doing a lot of civil rights work, marching, voting, you name it. And Daniel was an eager, ever-present, quick learner with his feet. And so many, when the Pope did the climate encyclical, Daniel was there. So, it's just a thing that makes you say Daniel is everywhere. And so we were pleased when he was Region 4 administrator. And then, yes, which we thank him for that work. And typically, especially with an appointment position, usually when you leave an appointment, you leave. Not our guy. Our guy was like, you can't, not yet, I'm not finished. I'm not finished. And so he has accepted a very challenging but critical assignment that connects all of what we've been saying up here. And so with that, I introduce Daniel Blackman. He will tell you his new role. I don't want to steal his thunder, so I'll let him do that. Daniel.
If we can give Felicia a hand, that would be great. First of all, I want to be very clear. If I had this, I turned 44 on Sunday. If I had this when I was 20, well, thank you for that. Praise the Lord. But no, on a serious note, Roberta, you mentioned your being of immigrant descent in your family. My family immigrated here from Barbados. My grandfather was a diplomat, and so when I sit here, knowing that my entry point to the energy sector was Hurricane Katrina. Felicia mentioned knowing me. Felicia met me when I was 19. And so for her to know me and to have been such a critical part of my journey, if I had not been, just to be very clear, Dr. McKoy, thank you for what you do, sir. I really appreciate it, because I'll tell you, when I first got involved, I didn't see anyone that looked like me. And we can talk about all these numbers and all the investment we want, but we know that 9 times out of 10, our young men and women identify with individuals that then are entry points for their career paths. So I didn't see anyone at FEMA or Department of Energy or any of the federal agencies like EPA, where I continue to serve, that were at a position of a Michael Regan that I could say, I want to do that, right? So let me just be very clear. When I was regional administrator up until last month, 56% of the country's HBCUs are in Region 4. Okay, that's the Southeastern United States. When Dr. McKoy had the slide and you saw those dots, I want y'all to understand the significance of those dots. But I also want you to understand and not separate the fact that HBCUs cannot be boxed in to one specific space, okay? I'm a proud alum of Clark Atlanta. My wife is a proud alum of Spelman College. Her dad went to Hampton. My aunt went to we have a tremendously large line of HBCU alum in our family. And I'll say this really quickly to what Dr. Gragg said and to where we are as a community. We cannot lose sight of the critical importance of this moment. We are literally at the intersection of AI and energy. And so when you think of what you mentioned earlier about journalists, we have to begin to introduce storytellers. We have to connect those dots. This gentleman here, being as smart and brilliant as he is at this age, we can no longer think that we're just going to build a federal workforce or utilize our HBCUs to just produce workers when entrepreneurship is critical, government contracts are critical, right? So when I think of Justice 40 and I think of all these areas, I think of not a civil rights movement where I started, but a civil rights movement. An opportunity for us to build generational wealth. As a matter of fact, Frederick Douglass once said it's better to build strong boys than to repair broken men, right? Our communities for too long have been crippled. And that's why this space where Blythe has sits and her commitment and where we've been over time, we can't expect to move the needle forward with Jess, and I'm going to say this and be very direct. I'm proud of my HBCU and the Atlanta University Center, but guys, there's a whole lot of HBCUs that's not Howard, Spelman, Clark, or Florida A&M, right? And we can't take for granted the ability to leverage uniquely what each of these HBCUs provide. And conferences like this can't just be to check the box. So for sponsors that are here and for folks, we're gonna talk about a lot of money. There's a lot of money up here. She said 1.2 trillion, I'm adding it up. He said a couple billion, a couple hundred billion. Now I want you all to understand something. There's never been a time in history where within the policy, right, even if you go back to the New Deal, redlining was a very critical aspect of how we were left out. There's never been a time where the equation was set with us in mind, right? That doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean that we don't have gaps that need to be filled. But what it does mean is that HBCUs coming into spaces like this must now become ambassadors. Felicia's been on the front line for a very long time. And when you come into these rooms, it's not to reinvent the wheel. We have to figure out how to support this gentleman, right? We have to figure out how to get more campuses to collaborate when deadlines are fastly approaching. Administration has changed, right? I don't know when there's going to be another Regan, Blackman, McKoy, whoever else you want to name. I don't know when there's going to be a community-friendly, grassroots-centered, administration. Again, that's not perfect, but that has an intention to help to address some of the issues that underserved communities and specifically areas like MSIs and HBCUs have too long been left out of that conversation. So I'll leave you with three things really quickly. Number one, please, 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 when you get this information, don't just put it on your phone or write it down, activate it. Take it back to your campuses, get Felicia on the phone, get one of us, get our information, and let's then connect in a hybrid or virtual means to figure out what our next 5, 10, 15, 20 steps look like. When I think of many of the black male enrollment and achievement gaps that exist at HBCUs, it really allows this space to be pretty special because, folks may not realize, but Silicon Valley was created in 1971 off of an idea and a paper, a report. And they accidentally just said, this is the Silicon Valley, in saying how much silicon was in the area for them to begin to do their research. And 50, 60 years later, we now see this as a multi-trillion-dollar hub of investment and wealth, right? So when you think of EV, battery storage, rural areas and their ability to generate solar and build, and these communities that have been vastly left out of the equation. Georgia has 159 counties. When you go outside of Metro Atlanta, anyone in Georgia knows that it's Atlanta and the rest of Georgia. So when you talk about Macon, when you talk about Savannah, you can't talk about Savannah without talking about the ports. So Savannah State and all these schools and HBCUs that sit on coastal areas are critical for the Inflation Reduction Act, for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, because this is where research and development can take place, and we don't have to convince these young people to switch their majors. Just allow these folks that are English majors and business majors and I don't know, whatever else there is, and just show them how their degrees fits into the future. I spoke at the University of Georgia in one of my last meetings as a regional administrator. They have a School of Climate Science and AI. I want y'all to understand that they are creating and talking about climate in alignment with artificial intelligence. So now our historically black colleges have to begin to think about what that transition looks like so that we can embed those ideas into our institutions so that our young men and women, when they graduate, their degrees aren't obsolete, right? Number two, and probably the most important part, is it's not who's on these panels, it's who you're sitting next to that you don't know. Because a lot of times we come to conference and we want the people up here in the moderator's card and we want the speakers and we go through our the agenda, and look, sometimes there's someone next to you that's creating a technology that just needs your support and needs your institution to believe in them enough to present something. And they may be the one that employs 5,000 people in the next 3 years. So please get to know the folks in the room and share this information and build the kind of networks that will help to strengthen our institution so that the next time we come here with UNCF, and thank you to them for the platform, it's better. And then lastly, make sure, and this is going to be very important, in your cities, understand that the federal government, the monies this gentleman mentioned earlier, FEMA has it, USDA has it, EPA has it. So take your time to do the research to find out where all the money is at, right? This is just one pot. So I want you all to start thinking about what does it look like to align your land grant college with a grant, with your institutions, with technology, and how to support these things going forward. Thank you.
Okay, so this panel, and I promised the couple of people I know that came that they'd have an opportunity to ask a question. But I think they deserve another round of applause because if collectively HBCUs can just follow that much, we'll be better off. So are there any questions? So I see 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to start here. Please say, this is me channeling my Oprah again, about the back guy. But say your name, your organization if you have one, and your question.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been an excellent panel. Y'all get a round of applause again because it was excellent. And major gratitude. My name is Raina Turner Greenlee. I'm going to speak to the audience as well as the panel because I love the point you made, Daniel. I am with Black Sustainability. We actually have developed a network of over 2,200 sustainability practitioners of African descent around the globe because we understand the climate challenge is not just going to impact us where we are locally, it is a global challenge, and disproportionately Black people are going to be impacted the worst. So what we've done is we've pulled together all of these sustainability practitioners to provide the opportunity to connect with folks that have their own businesses, Black and green businesses, so that they can connect to these colleges, universities, and the students. It's less of a question, but more of a comment just around, it is a question because I'm gonna start off with how. What is actually going to be the best way to connect these sustainability practitioners, those who have solutions in ag and water and all of these challenges, to these resources or to these institutions? Because we've made an attempt to reach out to the institutions directly, right? We've made an attempt to reach out, we've made an attempt to try to get them connected to funding, but they need some hand-holding, they need some support to walk them through those guidelines because they are so entrenched in actually doing the work that we are trying to decide whether or not we need to hold that space to actually be that technical service provider to get them to you all. I think my greatest challenge or question is gonna be to you all. What would be the best way to get this network involved in all of the resources that you have outside of us just sending them that little bit?
Very good. Let's start here and roll on down.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you're doing. This is a global challenge, and I always say one of the things that we have really going for us is that, you know, all these incredible goals that they set in terms of greenhouse gas reduction and things like that, you're not going to do that without everybody being a part of it. So you know, you can't be left behind. But to answer kind of your question quickly, that is one of the big critical aspects. Even as we, you know, open up these funding opportunities, things of that nature, is kind of how to make sure that these organizations are getting access to it. Generally speaking, a couple things that we're doing within DOE or particularly within the Office of State and Communities program, we're trying to actually reduce the burden of actually how to apply for these funding aspects. As a director, I get these, you know, I get the approval of these funding opportunity announcements, and they come to my inbox, and they're like 130 pages, and that's without anybody putting anything in it. That's just what I see, right, before it goes out. And so part of this is looking at how do we do that, you know, how do we reduce the barrier by creating things like prizes or asking for concept papers that are much lower barriers. So that's kind of one thing we're doing. The other thing that we're doing is also trying to actively work now on how do we, you know, we're setting up an Office of Community Engagement that actually does go out and meet communities where they are. One of the things that I say is that, you know, even as the front door of DOE, that we serve as, the front door works both ways, right? Which means it's not just you sitting in the house waiting on somebody to knock on the door, but you actually go outside the front door. And so we're actively trying to put together a network that allows us to go in and connect with communities in a real way to help them get access to resources. We can't help someone apply for funding to us, but we can create a situation where we're trying to support networks to do that. So that's some things that we're doing.
Okay. Ooh. Okay. I'm going to use this little mic.
Just
Nope. I'm coming to you.
Honor your privilege, right?
Good morning, my name is Prince Brown from Voorhees University in Denmark, South Carolina. One of my concerns is that we see a lot of opportunities that are put out there, particularly from the federal government to HBCUs, but then when we begin to look at the criteria, most of us don't qualify. It ends up being basically what I call your major prophets or your top 10 who really qualify, the rest of us don't. And I'm not sure about immediately past, but in recent past, HBCUs were able to take advantage of only like 1/10 of 1% of the monies that are available, particularly with the contracts. I mean, the money is there, but for whatever reason, we were not able to get that. So are there any thoughts on how that could be changed, or how you could help us be able to take advantage of what you're offering to us?
So, yeah, EPA first, and DOE second.
So I didn't answer Felicia's first question, which my new position is Senior Advisor for STEM and Diversity Recruitment. So I play a dual role in helping the administration's focal points on how to increase that capacity. And I agree with you, because the majority of the challenges we had wasn't necessarily the information, the deadlines. It was to make sure that there was a stream of education and communication across the board. For example, we do a really great job with public hearing, right? Where we'll take a period of time, like for our greenhouse gas reduction fund, which was just announced, $20 billion, $6 billion of which goes to community serving organizations and, grassroots entities. We do a great job in planning out the process of opening that to the public. Where we miss the mark is collaboratively working with HBCUs and MSIs on an upfront and senior level meeting where, for example, when I was regional administrator, I had 862 people that worked for me. Well, 9 of them were division directors. We have to get our division directors on the phone with the heads of our institutions so that not only can we make sure they're available, but they are also prepared for how that process will look. Because again, it can get complicated. You mentioned 135 pages. It gets very complicated. So if we can be more proactive, I think that will help. 2 things we did in Region 4. Number 1, we had annual meetings where we worked with a CUP program, CUPP, where we worked on our assembling our HBCUs on calls, and we actually did a good job with that. We worked with our Office of Research and Development, and we were a lot more upfront with what was coming and signing MOUs. Where we missed the mark is not just signing an MOU, but making it executionable, right? A lot of MOUs are signed, but we ought to make sure deliverables are in place and that we focus specifically on connecting those dots for resources and funds during that process. So it's not just about jobs and workforce development, but resource allocation back to the institution.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I say this quickly because what you said is so critically important, right? Is that, how do you make sure that the landscape is able to benefit from these things? It's not just words, but it's action. So with me, a key part of why I've been so excited about this particular partnership is because UNCF has the ability to aggregate the universities, right? And so one key part of this is to kind of, stay tuned as I, talk with Kendra and Julian about how do we at DOE serve as kind of a partner in this network, right? I mean, it's about uniting because what I can do and what I try to do is I'm out in the community, right? Because we can't design these programs in the ivory tower and expect them to work, right? So part of this is actually understanding about what he's about on a grassroots level, kind of, how do we need to make sure the programming is set up so that you are able to access these resources, understanding what your capabilities are, so we can think about that, because there's a role for everybody in this. And so I say my thing is I want to figure out how do we take this UNCF network and really create again a table that we can bake in the things that come from you all to make sure that we don't have this issue of not being able to, just because it says that the resources are available to you, but you're not being able to access them.
Right. Okay.
Hello, thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Hurd. I'm currently at Clark Atlanta University, and two of my degrees are in forestry. Okay. And I've always been concerned about water sustainability. I know we talk about energy, but whether people know it or not, Atlanta is concerned. There was the water wars between Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And I grew up in the shadow of TVA, so I'm curious, how heavily are you involved in water sustainability?
I think we have 2 people, Anthony.
Okay, so first of all, you speak in my language and you're from my institution. First, a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law is over $50.4 billion for water infrastructure. And I think it's important for us to understand we need to know what comes into our states. For example, in the state of Florida, as conservative of a state as that is, $270 million per year for the next 5 years, what the state of Florida gets. The state of Georgia gets around $153 million per year over the next 5 years. And to your point about the water wars, that was very, very important and critical, but most people didn't understand from a litigation standpoint what that actually meant, since Atlanta's water is sourced from Lake Lanier area, right? So when you think about how those metrics operate, number one, we need to do more in having those conversations. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with like the Atlanta Regional Commission, but like we need to be more in those rooms as well. These rooms are great, but where zoning and planning and looking at, you know, how federal funding is being spent, we need to be in those rooms. There was recently awarded, prior to me leaving EPA, the state of Georgia opted in for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. $3 million came to Metro Atlanta and is here currently to help on the planning for the sustainability and the climate future of Atlanta. There's money available. So the first thing I would tell you to do is, Chandra Farley is over the Department of Sustainability for the city of Atlanta, and she's amazing. So I would say coordinate a meeting with leadership from within Clark Atlanta to make sure they meet with the city. Number two, work with our agency. There's a young lady right now, Denise Diaz. She is the Region 4 of the EPA's acting water director. Coordinate with Denise. I can make that connection before you leave, and find out exactly how much money is in Georgia through the state revolving fund, which doesn't come from EPA, but EPD, right? So find out where the money is and how it can be leveraged. And then lastly, coordinate. Yes.
He's gonna have to follow up on the last one.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. And then lastly, get my car at the end.
So we have a couple more questions and we have responses. So Richard, you hold. I'm gonna get this question out, that question out, and then everybody will respond. Okay, so.
Yes, hi, my name is Dr. Erica Holloman Hill. I'm a board member of Black Sustainability Network. I'm also a founder of a family-owned environmental consulting firm called IECA Solutions Incorporated, and we're working here in the Metro Atlanta. My mother is a proud graduate of the 1968 class of Clark College. My question to you all, especially around the endowment, I know that UNCF has an endowment. Can we talk about the importance of, one, our HBCUs establishing an endowment and the role then that that endowment plays in leapfrogging our physical infrastructure, but also the curriculum at our HBCUs?
And then, okay, I have another question before you all respond.
Greetings, my name is Sade Jones and I am an activist on the west side, specifically English Avenue in Vine City. And as a community resident, I want to know, how do you guys feel about, I know you're talking about other things as far as HBCU, I'm talking about community relationships with HBCUs. Most of the HBCUs have been nestled in the African American communities. And during this time that we're facing right now, is gentrification all around our HBCUs. And so how do we connect with community in a different way that will be bring sustainability in our communities? And when it comes to water, absolutely there's issues, and even on the west side concerning water. And when we think about clean water, we think about sewer separation. Yeah. And down Proctor Creek on the other side, there were the Europeans there, and they advocated during the Franklin administration for sewer separation. However, it was not a lot of advocacy up the creek, and that's in the African American neighborhoods. So they did not receive their sewer separation at that time. And so we're still dealing with it even as today. And so I want to know, at what point will we use the academic resources and intellectual strength from the HBCUs to go in and directly deal with the impacted neighborhoods around the campuses?
So that's all the questions. So started that in and work your way down. Respond to the questions that have been put forward and wrap up at the same time because we are almost out of time.
Yeah, well, I'll make a couple points. One, I think the water is very important, and that leads me to say in terms of our relationship and what the feds are doing, I think I'd like to see the feds use and speak more through the interagency working group, and so these things can get connected together. As the gentleman, he mentioned water. I think another important one is food. And what we do at FAMU, every 2 years we hold International Summit on Food, Energy, and Water, Nexus. But I just think it's really important. It goes back to the community and the questions you're asking in terms of that community engagement. But I think the other thing from the feds, I'd like to see the feds come up with some type of funding opportunity, whether it's a contract or a cooperative agreement for the HBCUs to build this capacity, and maybe through centers and institutes and things like that, because for just a faculty member, it's difficult to do those kind of things that we would like to do because our contract is to teach the students, right?
Right.
So we really need those opportunities in these other spaces through centers and research institutes. And I think that's something that maybe through both private and federal funding opportunities that we could establish and sustain and fund ones that already exist. We have a Center for Environmental Equity and Justice at FAMU. We have a Sustainability Institute, but they're not really properly funded and resourced.
Okay, and Richard, can you jump the microphone to Anthony and these three, just because our two federal people can wrap up.
So quickly around curriculum, at Stanford, there's a new school of sustainability, and myself and others there are really trying to ensure that part of the core focus of that new school is collaboration with HBCUs. And so developing decarbonization curriculum that professors at HBCUs can take to add to their own classes, create new classes, or collaboratively work together to do shared classes, which we actually do with Howard University right now. So I'll just add that real quick. And then on my phone, at the end of this, there'll be a QR code for y'all to use to share your contact, and everybody on this panel will have access to that to reach out to you to follow up. So if you want to, anything you're hearing today, if you want to follow up with any of us, please scan the QR code on my phone afterwards.
Sid? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's really important to have innovation centers at HBCUs, which are usually spaces where community and institutional contacts can collaborate on projects. I think a problem that I think some institutions like AUC face is opening up that space to community members for safety reasons. So I think we need to really understand what safety variables are in mind here, because I think having those spaces not only generate more STEM activities. There's a solar generator project which BSI is working on with a couple of alums from Morehouse and Clark Atlanta, and seeing projects like that that are so embedded in, or community feedback is so intermeshed with the actual process of building the solar generator and the technical aspects of doing that, making sure that students are engaged, they understand what the institution is doing to work with community partners, what values are being maintained throughout the project to ensure community feedback is prioritized, because community also is best situated to know what the challenges are for the area and have the amazing archival information that you have being based in the West End. So that needs to be, I think, prioritized in doing these projects and making sure students have access to the campus information about what the carbon inventory looks like. They're learning in part of that project and work with folks like you so they can understand how to do energy retrofits, and that information needs to not be proprietary, but I think shared with students, so there can be really good research collaborations amongst faculty and students, and that relationship is, I think, really important. So I think innovation labs are a way that can be kind of showcased to the community.
Awesome, yeah. Just to super quickly touch on the water sustainability point, my actual background is in investment banking. I used to do structuring for state revolving funds, and so I will say, I know specifically a lot of state revolving funds can even offer loans at 0%. So if you're in an organization that is especially concerned about water and water sustainability, 100% encourage you to reach out to whatever state you're in, the state revolving fund. To super quickly touch on endowments, I think, we like to look at endowments as future-proofing your institution. It's this pool of money that you want to ensure is going to be there in not just 20 years, but 30, 50, maybe 100 years. and make sure that it's able to support your institution way into the future. And finally, just on curriculum, I just want to say, you know, organizations like our asset management firm, we're very actively hiring folks outside of the quote-unquote traditional finance background. So, you know, my manager is a history major. One of my analysts is a philosophy major. We're very actively seeking people with environmental sciences degrees, engineering degrees, just all across the spectrum. You know, my second major is in political science, and because ESG and sustainability has unfortunately become highly politicized, that degree has suddenly become extremely useful. So you never know what the future holds, and so we're looking for well-rounded students with these backgrounds that can be applicable. And so I just encourage you to, you know, reach out. You know, I work very closely with our early talent team, so feel free to add me on LinkedIn, as other folks have said. And again, just thank you for being here.
And I'll be quick. I think this is critically important, and I think the one word I say is the name of the conference, Unite. I mean, I think you have to come together in a way, because everything that's said up here is absolutely correct. This is a historic moment. There's more money now, and things. I don't know when the money's going to come back again, right? But there's a word in there that says infrastructure, and part of that is not only physical infrastructure, but also, for me, social infrastructure. These HBCUs sit in the middle of these communities that need investment and building, and so all these pieces work together. So partly what I would encourage is, again, finding ways to come together, and then as you come together, come to us, right? Because we have a lot of resources, and you know, and the capacity that you have may be in coming together and moving forth than trying to do it all separate, right? At this moment in time, we're positioned to make these investments, and so I want to encourage that idea of uniting. And trust me, I'm here, so we're gonna be here for you.
I'll leave with two quick ending. You mentioned Vine City English Avenue. I listed as regional administrator Vine City as a national priorities listing, which accelerated them to have access to $1 billion, a portion of $1 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law under our Brownfields Investments Initiative. So there's funding available now. And I'll give you a quick example. Jackson, Mississippi.
Why just Vine City and not English Avenue?
Because Vine City, under our scope with the Brownfield Initiative, was the first that opted in. So we are actually working with Vine City and English Avenue with a corridor on free testing for their lead-based contamination. So English Avenue is included. So last thing. Jackson, Mississippi. We worked with Administrator Michael Regan. I want to say this real quick to respect the time. Administrator Regan worked with us to ensure $600 million will be going to Jackson. How we worked with the community, which I think is critical, is we're now training students at Jackson to be water operators for the facility to help with Jackson's water crisis. We can do the same thing here and in any other community that has an HBCU.
Thank you. Thank this panel. And in closing out, let me just say I am Felicia Davis, founder of the HBCU Green Fund, certainly working to make these connections to advance greener HBCUs and the communities that they serve, focused on increasing investment in infrastructure, because I think that's what I learned from Dr. McKoy. So I want to thank this distinguished panel. So if we need to take this show on the road, I think they've done a really good job. I'm going to stop here because we would end at 12, and any kind of exchanging, I don't know what's next. So thank you all.
Great job, Blythe. What's going on? So much going on. Yeah, no problem.